So this is not a time for me to start singing? Ah, darn.
And take it away, my friend.
Take it away. All right. Good, everybody. My name is Sean Kearney. We're going to have a little bit of fun with PowerShell desired state configuration. If you were at PowerShell Saturday 007, this is a session I was going to present before the nasty bug hit me. So you know what? We're going to have some fresh content. We're going to liven this, and we might even have a visit from the Underpants Gnomes. I'm not kidding. So for anyone out there who don't know me, my name is Sean Kearney. I'm also known as the Energized Tech, banned from coffee, banned from caffeinated beverages whenever I do presentations. I'm also a Senior Solutions Architect from Cistel Technology up here in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. We're a Microsoft Gold partner. And I'm a Windows PowerShell MVP, which means basically I tend to get all giddy when people make commandlet jokes. For those of you who are only hearing me today, I'm also an honorary scripting guy on the Scripting Guys blog. I'm the evil mastermind behind and that's right, count them, 4 separate PowerShell holiday specials. Too many off keystones, several series in PowerShell, including one I just did a few weeks back there on using PowerShell to spin up a Hyper-V environment with the free Microsoft trial software. And it also gets right down to, if you say the word PowerShell in front of me, my eyes light up, my hair explodes, and I really get excited. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm going to warn you, I get loud, I get excited. And for those of you who do know me, I know your volume levels are already turned down. So first off, hello, Florida. If you didn't know, I'm all the way up here in Ottawa, Canada, where we have had snow since I believe I got back from November Summit, and we haven't gotten rid of it since. We haven't had one day where it hasn't been snow. I recognize somebody had snow down there in Florida. I'm sorry I didn't send it down there, but we've had snow up here for quite a while. So anyways, we're here about DSC. So let's think about it, why you are even here. So what is DSC? Desired State Configuration. It's a concept Microsoft, well, at least to me, Microsoft initially came up when they were doing Azure with the software as a service, because a friend of mine was a developer connected to an Azure instance, and I saw that it was a Server 2008, the back-end server, and I said, oh, we can put files here. And he said, no, when they spit up the instance, the data is deleted. Azure is all about configuration. So the whole idea between what Azure was initially doing and what DSC is about is that you're more concerned with the configuration of that server. You're more concerned about where the data should be, how it is laid out there, rather than it sits on C drive all the time. It's more neutral, which is the nicest things about it there. It's the whole idea that if I had a Dell 2950 PowerEdge server and I pulled it off the shelf and I threw in a Hewlett-Packard, what's the real difference other than the physical hardware, really, when you get down to it? Well, it was the name of my server, it's the IP address. That's the whole idea behind desired state, is to define what the server is and what it needs, right down to its naming conventions, and that's your server configuration. So your server is more neutral. It's no longer based on the hardware. It's no longer based on what virtual machine it is or whether you're on VMware. It's about, I was a file server. I had the following services enabled. I had the following services on or off. I need to have it running in this particular state. That's what DSC is about. Now, what gets you into DSC? And like, what's driving your, mind. What might interest you? Like, let's figure the basics. Maybe you've got way too much on your desk. You're just typical IT pros. You've got the boss coming down on you saying, I need this done right now. I need this done, absolutely done right now. Now, if you're running a big enterprise corporation, you're Fortune 15, you've got the licenses, you've got System Center Virtual Machine Manager, you can spin up your templates. But maybe you're a smaller shop, maybe you're the IT pro on the go, maybe you don't have the licensing to spin up that lab environment with the bigger software, and you have to find another solution. So there's an option where DSC might come into play there, is the ability to take that standard environment that you need and spin up in an easier manner without extra costs. Or perhaps you want to avoid Mr. Murphy. See, DSC is not just about defining the way the server needs to be. DSC is also about maintaining that configuration. I worked in an environment where we had developers that had direct access to some of our servers. It was just a legacy setup. And one of the things that sometimes happened is you got the new guy, had the rights he shouldn't have had, and he made changes he shouldn't have changed. And suddenly the website's down. Well, if you have DSC in play, one of the things DSC can do is constantly go out there, it's like every 15 minutes or so, and check what its configuration is supposed to be. Should I be running IIS? What are the base files that should be on here? And then if it's out of that configuration, it reapplies it and corrects it. Maintains that certain services are always running. It doesn't mean you don't run SCOM anymore. It doesn't mean you don't monitor your servers. But what it can mean is that the server has reported that iNet pub shut down temporarily for whatever reason. And you can't get remote access to that server. You're busy. It's a weekend. Things happen. But DSC, imagine him as your second technician, goes out there and he's been told to monitor the following services. Make sure these are always running. So DSC goes in, kicks in, restarts the service, and picks it back up there. SCOM picks up the alert, or your monitoring software picks up the alert. You've got other guys working on your hand. It doesn't mean that the problem is gone, but it does mean that there's a way to maintain the configuration of that server so you don't have that outage through the whole weekend. The outage might be 15 minutes. Or maybe the outage is self-corrected because that file that the developer put on that should have been there is returned to what it should be. That's what DSC is about. DSC is not just about applying configuration, it's about maintaining it. But let's forget the whole word configuration. What DSC is all about, because it's based in PowerShell, is simplicity. That's why I really like DSC. It's not that I can tell you that this server is going to run the following features and I run a script to do it. With DSC, it's a very simple, easy to read template that when it's done creates a file that meets a standard. So our hero today is PowerShell DSC. Now, I was going to show you a really cool video with Captain Hammer flying to the day, but we have bandwidth considerations. So we're going to simply show you our hero, PowerShell DSC. He is the new Cape Crusader, of course riding a blue cape. DSC is the one flying to the scene. DSC is the one ready there to save your day. And DSC is one of the best features built into PowerShell version 4. And I'm going to put a small piece on your plate right now. DSC also sits in the free Hyper-V Server 2012 R2. So if you're like me and you got a minimal budget at home and you want to spin up a Hyper-V server and use DSC at your disposal there, it's inside that server too. So not bad for a free tool. Come on, computer, click. I didn't click the arrow. Sorry, folks. Okay, so as we were saying, desired state configuration. Overall, let's keep it simple. It is a it's literally a configuration that you want your server to be at. It allows you to define the components that the server should have. Keeps the server running the way it should be operating, right down to, as I was saying, so if you didn't know much about a web server, you just knew that there was, let's just say we got a web server, and you know the web server has to have the back-end web services. You have to have a certain file structure to that web server. It might have a name, might have an IP address. So if I had to pull that web server out and provide a brand new one in its place there, what makes it different from the old one? Only those features, that configuration. And that's what DSC is about. Now, what's really cool about DSC, other than the fact it makes my life easier and it's easy to work with and it sets your configuration to want it, is that it's another piece where Microsoft steps towards meeting industry standards, not Microsoft standards. That word is now being thrown out the door. So with DSC, the output file, when you're done with it, is a MOF file, MOF. That's an industry standard. So with DSC, you use PowerShell, which is a Microsoft technology, but the end result is it produces an industry standard format to leverage for that technology. So there's some interesting ideas with DSC. myself. Yes, that's better. If I don't mute myself, that would really help the audio. Sorry, folks. All right. We can all hear now my loud, abusive voice? Thanks. All right. Yes. Let's just chalk that up to the demo gods. All right. So what is the configuration? As I was saying before, the configuration of your server is literally what defines it as a server. And if you're thinking about it, I've got a brand new Server 2012 R2 box. I spin the media up. I turn it on. What's the configuration? Well, let's think about it. You got to give that server a name. You got to give it a NetBIOS name. There's certain features like the web services. You might have certain key files, your IP address. It might have to have certain critical services running all the time. That will be what I would define as the configuration for a server. So if I had to replace that server, just drop in a brand new one, I really just need to apply the configuration. And that's what DSC is about. It takes it away from being it's a Dell 2950 with all this and a Hewlett-Packard this, or it's a virtual machine. It's a server. That's all it is. It happens to be a web server. And here's the following settings that define that web server. That's the configuration, at least in my mind. There might be better ways to describe it, but that's how it makes sense to me. So with PowerShell desired state configuration, when you get down to the server setup, you're going to be looking and say, well, here's the way I want it to look. Really. It's a file server. It's going to have file features. It's going to have files on it. I'm going to have the following NTFS permissions in there. That's what my file server looks like. The name might even not be relevant. Because if I have a whole stream of file servers under DFS, I just want these features on these computers. The other big part, as the same with DSC, is the maintaining that setup. And that's one of the biggest things that can mess up some environments, is that okay, let's go for a typical scenario that I used to work in. I was the consultant. I went out, I set up the server for a site, and you walked in, let's just say 2 months later, and things are all broken. Because somebody who had local administrative credentials that shouldn't have had local administrative credentials if his life depended on it, got to my server and started messing with it. Well, wouldn't it have been nice if I had DSC in there maintaining the configuration of that server? So when let's just call it our special little friend who really shouldn't have had those rights start playing with the server, DSC kicks in and undoes all his messes. It fixes it back to the way it was. That's kind of a nice idea. And I'm going to rehab the same thing. This is a free feature of PowerShell version 4. This is not expensive software like System Center, although it works well in conjunction. This is a free feature out of the box. I mean, I would have killed for this years ago when I was a field tech. Not only does it apply the server's configuration, which would have made my task easier spinning up a new server, but it can maintain it the way it needs to be run. So again, if that developer had too many administrative rights and was granting permissions to other developers to folders he shouldn't have had, DSC, I could have had a thing defining that the folder structure had the following permissions. Now you could do PowerShell scripts, you can do VB scripts that do very much the same. There's no question about that. What's nice with DSC when you get to see its configuration is I hate to say this, it's not a script. I mean, it runs like a script, but it sure as heck doesn't look like a script, which is nice for people that are new to technology, especially new to PowerShell, or better yet, maintaining data centers. It's not meant to look like something a PowerShell MVP would be used to. It's meant to be something that a human would look at, and it would make sense to a human. And that's why DSC gets really cool. So with DSC, you've got two basic models, two basic setups. Now, really, you're going to hear about the push model I'm talking about right now and the pull model. As far as your PowerShell DSC configuration file is concerned, it's the same file. As far as how the MOF files are defined, they're the same file. The difference between the push model and the pull model is, well, let's go about it. With the push model, I have a DSC configuration on a server, and I literally run a PowerShell command line, and I push that configuration to a destination server with PowerShell version 4. The server with PowerShell version 4 on the other side receives that configuration and says, let me just run the following scripts for you automatically. So it might be doing get Windows feature, install Windows feature in the background. It might just be doing new item in the background. But you'll never see that, nor will you ever care. You don't need to know PowerShell other than how to build this little file in the PowerShell ISE. So the push configuration, literally it says run this commandlet and it pushes that information out there. Now, we've got another scenario if I would click the right button, I clicked the right button too fast, the pull model. Sorry about that, folks. And the pull model is exactly what you think it is. In the pull scenario, the infrastructure is a little bit different, and I can't show you that today because it takes me a little bit more to set up there. But in this pull scenario, your servers are going out there, and they're checking a key server saying, oh, by the way, I know what I'm supposed to run, but I've been told I should check you for my desired state. What should it be? And it actually brings that desired state down to the server and allows it to say, oh, self-correct. So let's just say all your web servers were running DSC. And you changed a master configuration on the main server that says, okay, by the way, our new DSC servers that are running web in this particular group have to have this eventual feature. Let's just say we're now running ASP.NET. So rather than going to each individual server and running a PowerShell script doing install Windows feature or manually going there adding it yourself, with DSC, you define that change to the configuration. And all the computers that are within that configuration now have a new BOF file created for them. And the computers in pull, when they're in the pull scenario, go out there and grab that configuration and self-maintain. Or, again, as we're going later on there, what if it's a DMZ server? How easy it is to talk to a DMZ server directly. Usually not. Security guys don't like you going directly to servers and accessing file shares. That's a big no-no. But with DSC, we've got an interesting option. And that interesting option is having a private channel set up there so that the server goes out, hits a web service, and says, oh, here's my configuration, thank you very much, I'll bring it down, and I'll do the work in my own local location. And of course, with PowerShell DSC, we have new commandlets. So to make our lives easier with DSC, once you've got this configuration built up, they've got some commandlets for actually getting what the DSC configuration is. We've got some commandlets for testing it, some commandlets for pushing it. Now, there's one commandlet we don't have yet. And we'll fiddle with that later on there. There's Stephen Murawski was doing something really cool. And the one we don't have is the ability to get the configuration from a server and build a DSC from that. But there's some interesting things we can do from a server to build a DSC template from that. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But we got some new commandlets to play with, and as always with PowerShell commandlets, if you don't know how to use these, how do you think we check how they work? Take your commandlet, get help, put the commandlet name in there, hyphen examples. So every one of these commandlets has got some basic examples, some basic rudimentary how-tos. And to be quite honest, this is how I learned how to use DSC. I went online, got some rudimentary examples of a template, and I took those commandlets and I said, well, PowerShell, show me your help. Show me some examples to work with. So DSC still sticks with the same format we got for everything PowerShell. It's easy to work with. We got examples of how to use those commandlets, but it goes up another level. It makes templates that look PowerShell-ish for you and E that are used to PowerShell, but they're not so complex looking. They're not so scripty looking that a brand new admin could look at it and get a feel for what it looks like. There's code in there, but it doesn't look like code. That's the cool part. And as I was mentioned before, the biggest thing about DSC, the biggest thing about the desired state configuration is we're all about standards now. You're looking at a PowerShell script. You're running a PowerShell commandlet. But the end result of all that is a file that meets an industry format, a MOF file. That's the coolest part about all this. It's Microsoft giving you the tools that you can work with, but bringing it down to a level that the industry wants you to work with. Now, with DSC, you've got a series of resources you can work with on those servers. So at the very end of this, there's a hyperlink that will actually have the link to TechNet that gives you all of these resource names and how to actually get the values for them. That's what the first thing I found tricky with DSC was, okay, well, I know I can turn on a feature, but how do I know what are the valid values? So there's a hyperlink at the very end of all this that will show you where you can get this in TechNet and where you can get the values and how to work with them. But you can see going down the list there, we've got a series, well, it looks like, is that 10 or 12? That's a lot of them. So I can actually archive and unarchive zip files in these destination servers. I can set the environment variables. I can define the following files or directories have to be there. How about local groups? We define that a server has the following local groups predefined with the following user memberships. Again, we can do this with a script, but the cool part we're pointing with DSC is that you don't have to be a scripter to really work with DSC. That's the cool part. So every one of these things I know right now I can write in PowerShell. And it's going to be PowerShell commandlets, and it's going to be PowerShell code. And if you're a VB scripter, I know you can do it VB script. But the cool part is creating users, managing services, running scripts, roles, defining registry values can all be done in a template that makes use for a regular human. All of this is a PowerShell and DSC template. We define all this in a way that makes sense for regular people. So let's look at what a basic DSC file is. And I'm going to call it the anatomy just because I made up that word for DSC. I couldn't think of anything else. But really a DSC file, at least again, this is for me, this is how I was able to learn it, really only falls into three parts. You've got the configuration, which has got a name, which actually, let's put this on parallel to something else. If you've ever created a PowerShell function, the configuration is just like workflow and function. This is where you're defining what you're working with. So we're going, this module is a configuration. We're going to give it a name. Now, I called it name of configuration. I could call this Jello Bunny Rabbit. I could call it my file servers. I could call it my web servers. I could call it my standard SQL Server setup, or I could call it Blue Lagoon. But that configuration defines everything under it. So I'm showing one node here. Now your node is your server or your servers that you're defining for the configuration. Now in a standard DSC file, you're actually putting the static name of the node or the server name. That doesn't mean you can't go dynamic. This is just your basic DSC. And then underneath, you're going to define all the resources that particular node would require. So if the node was my file server called, let's see, Contosa file server, and that file server required, the print server required certain files to be activated before I deployed it in production, I can actually define all of those resources that file server is going to require. Or more particularly, if I get into fancier, I can sit there and say a generic file server will have the following setup on there. And then if I want to get into a little bit of PowerShell, I can actually pass a parameter down to where it says node name and say, when you spin up a file server, here, give me the name via the parameter, and here's what they all should look like. So that means if I had to spin up a SQL Server farm, yes, they'll all have different names. They'll have some slightly different configurations outside of that, but they all may have the same basic setup. So I can sit there and say, when I spin up a SQL Server or a group of SQL servers for my development team, here's what they all look like to start with. And that's one of the cool things I can define. So you got the name of the configuration, the particular node you're targeting, and the actual resources that are being applied to that node. That's DSC. Now flip over here, and we'll show you what an actual DSC file looks like. Now, although we see our nice little friends, the curly brackets, and we see some quotes and unquotes, and it looks like PowerShell, and in all truth, it runs in PowerShell. So you and I are familiar with it and happy with it. Look at the file itself, though. There really isn't a lot of actual code. I see the configuration. I've called it my web config. I see the name that this configuration is applying to. Server called server 001. Under the server, I can see the actual resources it requires. So the web server, looking at this, requires a web server role. It has to be present. The web server has to have certain files on there. Now, one of the cool things with DSC is you can even define that it has to have a default directory structure and it has to come from somewhere. With DSC, I can even sit there and say, looking at this example down here, that not only am I bringing files over, but before you put these files, before you make this structure on here, it's important that the web server feature is enabled on the server first. That's one thing. So you're looking at a DSC file, and again, although this runs in PowerShell, although it's got the nice pretty colors, it's not hard to read. If I wasn't a PowerShell MVP, if I was a new guy coming to a computer and you showed me this, there's a good chance this actually might make some sense. You're looking at it. It's like, okay, well, there's a configuration name. There's the name of the machine I'm targeting. So if I had to rewrite this entire file, and let's be dead simple, if I want to spin up a new web server and I want to call it for server 002, I look at that and say, well, if this targeted server 001, if I want to apply the same configuration to a new server, I just change this thing, rerun the DSC, and apply it. And if server 002 exists on my network and I can talk to it, I can apply the configuration to it right now. So we can see if there's an advantage of DSC right now. Once you've got a template of what your environment needs to look like for a machine or sets of machines, once you've got that, you don't have to sit there. Well, you should have your documentation explaining how you spin up your web server. That's critical. That's important for disaster recovery. But what it means is that when you have to recover that web server, you've got your backup page, you got your lattice strategy to make things going there, but recovering that is less of a headache. Or you're trying to spin up a lab environment. Like me, I've got a Hyper-V server over here, and I really would like to have SCVMM, but I've only got 8 gigs of RAM. Well, because I've got DSC sitting on the Hyper-V box, I can have DSC have templates to find that my base virtual machine for Lync server has the following features in there, and just apply that to a new Lync server as I spin it up. This is where DSC gets really cool. It's easy to work with. It's not too difficult to work with. There's lots of resources online, as always, with PowerShell. And if you're familiar with PowerShell, you're just throwing your word of PowerShell. And if you're new to it, you're not looking at a PowerShell script. You're looking at something that's almost a text document. This is readable. A regular person, actually, I was walking from VB script and never used PowerShell before. I could look at this and pretty much get a gist of it. There's not enough code in there to, I'll be honest, scare me off. So my good friends, the Underpants Gnomes, have come over here to help me out. So really with the DSC, I think of it in 3 phases. Now, this may not be the most correct way to interpret it, but I do see DSC in 3 simple phases. First one, let's run. You create your desired state configuration file. And that's the file you just saw on there on the screen. You define your configuration, you define your target node, and you define the resources for that node. Nothing more than that. Now, it's best to do it in the ISC. I find it easier that way for myself. You can have an easier time debugging it, and it shows you all your nice little curly brackets in there. So the ISC, for me, I find to be a great way of editing DSC files. Then, phase 2. You run that DSC, and it creates a target folder for your configuration and a target file for each one of your nodes. And that file is a MOF file. Then we have phase 3. You run the PowerShell commandlet, applying that configuration, and it'll sit there and access all the MOF files that are meant for the various nodes, and it'll apply that configuration to the nodes. And when you're done, profit. That's right. There's actually some profit, because the thing is, once you've got DSC in place, once you're used to running it, you are actually done things a lot more efficiently, a lot quicker, a lot easier. Again, you're doing it with PowerShell in the first place, you're already good. But the nice part is once you start doing DSC, you can show your coworker who may not be a Tier 4 scripter and say, if you need to add more features, here's our documented process, which is simply add these blocks in there. He could edit it. It would not be a scary process, mind you. You should have a process that before he gets to go put in production, he hands it off to you. But you could hand these templates to a delegate and showing them the basics of how to add features to the server, have them build the templates for you. And then just hand them off to you, and then you apply them. Now, as I was saying, it's a very simple process. So in my case, I love using PowerShell the ISC for this. So phase 1, really, we're going to have the ISC. We're going to create a desired state configuration file in that. When the configuration is done, we're just going to run it like a script. Now, when that script is done running, you know how you run a PowerShell function? You create the function, you run it, and then once it's created and compiled in the memory, you can just execute it almost like as a commandlet. That's DSC. DSC works the same way. You run the script, it places the DSC function, or let's just call it DSC configuration in memory, and you execute it just like a function. When you execute that DSC function, it builds the updated MOF files. That's phase 2. Then phase 3 is that you run PowerShell commandlet, and depending on your push scenario or a pull scenario, you take those commandlets and push them out to your destination nodes. That easy. It's not a nightmarish solution. It's cool, it's free, and it really genuinely is easy. So I'm going to flip over to my server environment here, and we're going to cross our fingers we don't lose connection. I'm going to go to my desktop and manage presentable content. Yeah, I have to reconnect my desktop. Sorry, folks. Click. Show desktop. Do you want to show all your pictures? No. Oh, no, it's too late. All right, so give me a moment here. Get a little of a mirror and mirror effect. Yep, as you can see me looking at you. I'm going to pop over to my first machine over here. And my domain. All right. Give it a few seconds here. Because I know we're going through the internet. And the internet on its best days is not fast. Or more correctly, the internet is not fast when you want it to be fast. Okay. Now, I'm presuming you all see this now. So I'll go forward a little bit there. So looking at here, we have a PowerShell DSC file. And as you see up here, literally, it's a PS1 file, PowerShell script. Looking at this file, we've got the configuration name. The configuration here is called my sample file server. Now, again, I can erase this and call this, let's call it configuration, flying gerbils. A silly name, and it makes no sense. But you could call it that. We won't. Because the other part is that this is a production environment. First off, you'll have to explain this to your boss. You don't want that. My sample file server. So that's the name we've given to our configuration. Now down here you can see the node. And the node is targeting a server called EOT-FPS. So I'm targeting literally a server or a computer whose name is EOT-FPS. Nothing more bizarre than that. I could use an FQDN, but I just use the standard good old-fashioned NetBIOS. Looking down here, with this particular server, I want to make sure there are certain Windows features defined. One of them is file storage. Now, in truth, in Server 2012 R2, the file storage feature is already enabled, so this one's a bit redundant. But we can't put it in there. But I also want the server for sharing printers. So I've already said that the Windows feature, I'm going to call this printer sharing. And again, the names we see, file storage, these are not names made by Microsoft. These are names I came up with. So file storage could be standard file server configuration. It could be fluffy bunnies. Whatever makes sense to you. It should make sense, however, because you're going to look at this later on, hand it off to another technician. It should be sensible. It should make sense. But this is a name I've made up. Under each of the Windows features, you're going to see there's a name. For example, print services. Now, when you get the link at the very end and you get to that TechNet web page that's going to show you the resources, where it's getting all these features and all these names is directly from the server itself. So if I was to do get Windows feature and say get Windows feature star print start, the Windows feature that is the root for print services literally is called print-services with a capital P and a capital S. So that's where you're getting your names from. And the TechNet document will give you all sorts of information about how to get the various values that go attached to that. I can define a resource like file. So if this is a file server, there's a good chance I might want to have a root file structure that's not the root of drive C. I'm pretty certain that'd be a good idea. So for my destination file servers, I can sit there, and even if I don't put in content, I can sit there and say, I should always have this folder here called files. Now, I haven't gone any deeper than that because I do want to keep this fairly simple for us to look at there. You could do all sorts of crazy stuff with your configuration. But there's your base configuration. There's the resources this server requires in order to be a server. So, although this is for the server called EOT-FPS, if I was to spin up a brand new server that had to be the same way, a file server for sharing printers, let's say it's for a satellite office, I just changed the node name. Now, here's another example down here. Literally, I've called it my web server. Now, this is one script, but this one script contains two configurations. This is just like when you're doing functions. You can have as many functions in that script as you want. You don't have to run them all at the same time. And it's the same here with my DSC. Now, I can actually break this up into several PowerShell scripts to organize it a bit better, or I can have one master file. That's up to you. I would probably say breaking down to smaller files and segments to manage them over a long term is a good idea. But this is a demo, and we're going to keep it simple. So in this case, we've got a configuration simply called my web server. The targeting node is EOT-web. Now, we're going to have some fun with this one because DSC out of the box assumes a trust. So the destination box is on the domain. So the WinRM can talk to the destination WinRM because they're on the same domain. There's a trust between the new machines, and they can just do the things. But a DMZ is typically a different scenario. Typically, that machine is not on the domain. Typically, it can't participate in the domain. And you're going to have to do a few things to make the DMZ work. But we'll touch on those a bit. It's actually not that hard. It's based on the same rules as when you have to talk to a DMZ or a non-trusted server with a WinRM normally. But as you can see, we defined that there should be a feature for the server called web server. And again, you go to your Windows features, you find the name of the web server there, and you get it from get Windows feature. In this particular web server, although INET Pub is going to get spun up, I've said, you know what? I want to make sure that there's a special folder for my developers, because my developers always have their code in a brand new folder. It's outside of INET Pub. They can spin up their test websites. So I can sit there and say, anytime I spin up a server in our environment, that there's a special folder for my developers, or whatever purpose it serves. I can even have a file structure brought in there. Now, this point, we click Start, the script runs, and now the DSC is ready to go. Now, our next task is we want to make this into useful. We need to execute the desired state configuration that we just created and have it produce something useful. So right now I'm in the folder here called ISO, and I'll see if I can bring my mouse up so we're not quite so tiny-eyed. Do I get child item? And you'll see the only thing that exists in this folder right now is my DSC example script. Now what's going to happen is, now that I've run that script, I know I have two new, well, they're not functions, they're configurations, but they work like functions, ready in memory. So let's run it again. Now, what was the name of one of them? Configuration up here was called My Sample File Server. So at this point, this is just like running a function. I'm going to type in My Sample File Server. I hit enter. And what it does is it goes through configuration that's been defined in here and literally creates a MOF file for a server called EOT FPS. Here's where things get interesting. If you had parameters in this to change the server name, you could actually have this same configuration being used to define one more server or 100 more servers, and it would create a MOF file for each individual server. And we're sharing the desktop, you should be able to see this, so I'll do Notepad, EOT, FPS, MOF. Oh, sorry. I have to go into the folder called Notepad, My Sample File Server, EOT, FPS MOF. And this is our industry standard MOF file. Now, you could, if you were really, really adventurous and a bit of a madman, do this yourself. Hard code it. But the fun part here is, let's step back to PowerShell land. Doesn't this here make a whole lot more sense to the average human? So that's the other cool thing, is that you're getting something that makes sense, it's easy to read, and produces it down to the industry standard. Doesn't matter if the industry standard couldn't be read by somebody with a PhD. This is something that's easy to read and easy to work with for everybody. Now, just like we did with the file server, if I want to create the configuration for the web server, I do the exact same thing. I've already compiled the files. They're already in memory. I just type in the configuration name up here that's called My Web Server. My Web Server. Oops. Run that, and it compiles and it creates the MOF files. That's the hardest part, the DSC, is building your file and compiling it. And if we look at our folder here, you'll see I now have two new folders. So each folder that's created by the DSC is for the configuration. So the configuration is called My Sample File Server actually has all the MOF files and all the files for those nodes for that particular configuration. Save My Web Server. Now at this point, you've only defined the configuration. You haven't touched anything. You haven't broken anything. The boss is not coming screaming down the hallway say, "What did you do to the file servers?" You just built your configuration. Now again, because this is DSC, you could just as easily, and this is the part I really like about it, change these node names to your development servers. Make sure it works right. It all looks good. We've run it through our validation process. It's gone from the development. It's gone to the QA environment. We've gone to pre-prod. We've gotten all the sign-offs. We just changed the node name. Now I can go to production. That's pretty cool. It's not hard to go from one environment to the next environment. You're just changing a minor piece of the configuration, the name. Or, again, if we go into later on, we can use parameters and simply run that script targeting with a different script of servers. Now, here's the fun part, the part I really, really, really like. We use it. So, as the magician said, there's nothing up this sleeve, nothing up that sleeve. I'm going to flip over and show you my file server. So we have a server here called EOT FPS. You'll see, I'm going to refresh it. There's nothing on this root folder other than your standard perf logs, program files, users, windows. This is a brand new server I spun up a day ago. Nothing's been done to it. It's not been patched, which is probably a bad idea if this was a production environment, but it's a brand new server. And just to show you that I'm not lying about features, let's do get Windows feature print. It'll take a few seconds. As you can see on the screen right now, none of the print features have been enabled. The very feature called print services is still marked as available. It's not installed. Now, here's where the fun part starts. Go back to my domain controller, and I'll wait a bit because I know that we're going to get some lag time here. All right. Now, if I want to apply that configuration, yeah, as you can see, I was playing here just before you guys came on. So, if I want to use that configuration right now, I use the PowerShell command called start DSC configuration. This is a push scenario. This is where I'm actually going to take a configuration and push it to the list of nodes. You'll notice in this commandlet, I'm only targeting the folder that has the MOF file. At no point do you see the server name anywhere here. The reason you don't see the server name is I don't care. This particular commandlet is being told to take whatever configuration you have and whatever nodes are contained with this configuration. This could be a bunch of file servers. This could be a whole suite of web farms, and apply this configuration down to that list of servers. So we're going to hit there, enter. Now this will take a few minutes because I'm running all of this on my laptop. And you all know that rule 1 is that you're never, ever, 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 ever supposed to run your production servers on your laptop, no matter how cool it sounds. And I'm not. This is my demo environment. Now, I'm not sure if you can see it coming across on the screen through the internet, but right now the commandlet is running. It's going out to that server, and it's making the changes on that server. Now, if you look at the screen, it's actually running commandlets like set target resource, and it's doing all sorts of cool stuff in the background. Now, remember, that file server had no root folders other than the base ones from Microsoft. That file server had no features other than the stock features on that server. We were trying to enable the print services feature from that simple file structure. Now, this will take a few moments. I think I was rather cheap today. I only get the server 512 megs of RAM. Again, production servers, don't be stingy on your memory resources unless you want the users complaining. But if you like the users complaining, that's okay. That's up to you. Get a nice pretty bar showing us what it's doing. It's going to twiddle its thumbs. La 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 la. We could all bring into a rousing chorus of Highway to PowerShell. We're waiting for this to finish. No, it won't take that long, actually. And the other part is, what's slowing this down right now is not DSC. What's slowing it down is because Sean gave 512 meg RAM to a server. Now, at this point, we can see on the screen it's finished. It actually has even returned a status back from the server. This is a brand new server. I just spun it up. Guess what I didn't turn on? Windows updating. DSC has come back and said, by the way, just as if you ran the install Windows feature on the remote server directly, if there was a status report that came back for running that commandlet, it comes back to our good friend here, DSC. This is all done through PowerShell version 4 and WinRM DSC. Now, we're going to flip back over to that formerly blank file server. Now, We looked at the screen before, and it was blank. Print document surfaces were not enabled. I'm going to rerun the exact same commandlet. Nothing up this sleeve. Nothing up this sleeve. Nothing up here. We hit enter. Ta-da! Look on the left-hand side. Printed document services is now checked off. This is now a print server. The features are installed. I didn't actually go to this server and touch it. I didn't log into it. I didn't do install Windows feature. I didn't run a script. I said, thou shalt be running like this. Poof! Right down to, remember how we defined that there was going to be a key folder on this server? I'm going to go over here. And there's that folder I said called Files. Let me get this off of your way. That's what happens when Sean clicks his keyboard too fast. But the folder we said that was part of this configuration called Files has been applied by DSC. Again, I know we can do a PowerShell script that'll do all of this. But if you look at that DSC file, that's something that makes sense to just about everybody. There was minimal code involved. It didn't look like code to me. And the nice part is it won't look like code to regular people, which will make them less apprehensive about touching it. Now, remember I was mentioning about talking to a DMZ server. So over here, I've got a computer called EOT-Web. This will be my target for DSC. You notice that this server has nothing, just like our friend before. It's a base server just spun up. And I'm going to check the web server feature is presently not installed on this server. So, now the interesting scenario with this one is that we're going to have to go in and do it through a DMZ environment. So, problem with this server here is that I can't trust it. There's no trust on there. So if you're talking to a server that's not on your domain, this is the same rules you have to do when you're setting up WinRM to talk to a remote workstation that's not trusted. You have to establish a trust. Now that is done from our host server. So if I wanted to set up a trust here, whoops, because I hate typing, I've put it on the screen already. I run our good old-fashioned WinRM commandlet. Come on, Sean, where'd you put them? There we go. So to establish that trust, I've actually run the following command in WinRM. WinRM set, and I've got on the blog site somewhere, so you don't have to dig for it, but basically you're running the set WinRM config client, and you're adding to your trusted host list. So I've actually told this server, you're trying to talk to WinRM in the remote server that's called EOT-Web. You can trust a connection with it. The other thing you've got to do is WinRM, you have to be able to resolve the name to the IP. If that doesn't work, you can't do anything. The other big one is when you're doing a DSC push to a server like that, you're going to have to provide credentials. So it's a little bit different than when we ran it last time. Wait, I'll wait till the sun goes down. All right, so the commandlet is very similar to last time. We're going to run start DSC configuration. We're going to specify the folder that configuration is within. Now, there's probably other ways you can do this, but for a simple push scenario, this works just as well. We're going to target the computer name this time and specify the credentials. I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to ask me, what's your credentials? So administrator. Yes, I know we shouldn't use the local administrator account. We should create another account that's also administrator with different password. This is a demo environment, folks. Secret password? No, it's not password. I lied. Yes, it is. And now we're going out to that DMZ server. We're applying this very configuration to it. Take a little bit longer. I think I used a different parameter on this one because you're getting much more verbose output, which I actually kind of like because, yes, that's the other thing you can do. You can have the DSC when it's applying show you on your local console what the things it's doing. So you can see down here on the right-hand side, it's actually doing the get Windows feature commandlet. Okay? It's showing me my installation of this part has started. It's actually doing all the work for me and giving a nice response. And the beautiful part about this is, again, this is a simple, easy-to-read template file. And I'm running this from a single server, and I can target 1 or 100 or 1,000 servers from this single spot. It's going out through WinRM and doing the work for it. So I don't actually know the limitations as to how many servers you can talk to at the same time. I'm going to guess that it has the same limitations or lack of limitations as PowerShell remoting, because that's also based on WinRM. But as you can see, we're going out there, we're going to the server. Give this a few minutes to do its magic work. And with any luck, that the connection doesn't break from us from the internet, and we don't lose our link this time, we should actually have a brand new web server with IIS preloaded and our special developers folder preloaded on that server. And again, don't load your web server with only 512 megs of RAM like Sean did. It's a demo machine. And it's come up with some status back saying, oh, by the way, Sean, your Windows Automatic Update is not enabled. I know, because I just deployed the server. And let's go even further. If you were to really play with DSC, you could probably even define this through the registry possibly, services, any number of ways you can set up automatic update on a new machine without actually touching the machine. Now let's head back over to our web server. UT web. Now before we looked at that and we saw that the web server service was not installed. I didn't RDP to the server. I didn't touch any magic keys other than apply the configuration. Let's check again. The great Karnak says we have a web server installed without anybody touching it. And remember, just like I said, we had certain... Did I just lose my mouse? I just lost my mouse. No, I didn't. So there's our file structure. And looking down here, guess who's here? My good friend inetpub. Just as if I had gone to the machine and ran the command directly. And that special folder I said my developers are going to have for putting their stuff in. And again, if I have to spin up a new version of this server, I just change the node name. I don't even have to think about what was my instructions. I should have the instructions written down. You have to have something in file for your documentation. But the nice part is reapplying that configuration is just run a script. A very simple script that says run this configuration. And this goes back down to my first statement. You could almost pass this down to a junior tech. I wouldn't recommend that you do. But it is a simple enough configuration that you could, well, actually, let's just say the junior tech or the developer have to spin up his own web machines. You could actually have the template for your developer on what your standard company web server looks like for him to spin up on his development web machines. That's it. He doesn't have to sit there and read the instructions and ask you questions about how to run and install Windows feature. He just runs one commandlet. And his development machine is set up exactly the way as your production machine is, because that's your desired state configuration for that machine or sets of machines. Isn't this cool? Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, it's free. As long as you have PowerShell version 4, it's free. And the other part to keep in mind with desired state configuration is that the desired state machines all have to be PowerShell version 4. So it's a version 4 talking to version 4 at both ends. So if one side is version 3, can't do it. But you can certainly take the PowerShell ISE. You can create the files in anything you want. If you're feeling like me and feeling really geeky, you can take Notepad out. You can type the file up in that. The only machine that's able to create that MOF file from that desired state configuration is PowerShell version 4. And that includes a Windows 8.1 machine. You have Windows 8.1, and that's where I've done all this from. You can create all these files and even create the files for the mod files on the Windows 8.1. You need the server to apply those configurations. Now, I would love to show you a pull configuration, but that's a little more time-consuming to set up. And as I can get notes on it, there's actually an excellent... I'll give you the resources here in a second, as soon as I can find it where I put my PowerPoint. Manage presentable content. Okay, you should see it. It's loading again. Demo gods don't strike me down. They didn't strike me down. Yay! Okay, we can skip by our little demo slides. We'll be showing you all that. And so, as I was mentioning before, there is no capture DSC. There is no commandlet that can sit there and run a web server and say, get the desired state that it's presently at and build that file from it. But I don't have to ping Stephen Murawski. He wrote a really cool way of doing it there. You could, let's just say you had a blank web server and all you were concerned with was, okay, what features are already on this web server? Because we know no web server is just inetpub. You've got the web server, you might have ASP, you might have certain types of authentication, and you've got your documentation to support that. But wouldn't it be nice to run a commandlet and grab that basic set of features and build a muff, at least the desired state from that, that's possible, because you could get Windows feature and play with a little bit of PowerShell and parse the output and maybe build this text file from there. I've actually, Steve Murawski did it. If you want to ping him, I don't know if he's got it handy, but he had a really cool trick that built at least a basic file so you didn't have to retype it out. Now, the other one to keep in mind is Hyper-V Server 2012 R2, the free one, has the same PowerShell. It has the same DSC features as the pay-for version. So here's where life gets interesting. Did I just mute myself? No, I just hit my button. Sorry, Mike. Where things get interesting is if you go to http://bit.ly/posh Hyper-V Lab. And the P is capitalized, the H is capitalized, and the L is capitalized. And I'll even put the link at the end. Oh, your network is busy, your server's busy. That's not good. Can we still hear me? Yeah, I think that was my PowerPoint deck went funny. Okay. There we go. Sorry about that. I had a little technical difficulty with my PowerPoint deck on this side. So one of the things you could do is go into that link, and I'll even post it at the end or email it out to Max if you want, is there's a nice little set of scripts you can download from TechNet script repository right now. And we have the articles on Hey Scripting Guy. And with these scripts, we're talking like 2 scripts. You're going to really like it. You can take the free Server 2012 R2, the demo one that you can run trial for 180 days, and using PowerShell and these simple scripts, you can spin up a brand new set of machines on them, right down to a domain controller. So that means you could actually spin up a lab environment. Now here's the interesting part. Because the free Hyper-V server also has DSC, what do you think you could do here? You could actually define your basic virtual machines on your domain and say, okay, by the way, when I spin up my lab environment, I want to have this configuration for a SQL server before I install SQL. I want this configuration for my web server, and I want this configuration for my file server, maybe a domain controller. You can have those files sitting on Hyper-V Server 2012 R2, run the commandlets from the free PowerShell version 4, and apply them to your virtual machines. Yes, System Center Virtual Machine Manager is the coolest thing ever. But again, I've got an 8 gig machine. I don't have a budget for this. I'm a tech like the rest of you before I got in the field. And this is affordable for everybody. This actually might be an alternate to the ability that you can't use TechNet anymore. But there are free tools from Microsoft and free evaluation software, and we can leverage them together to use the needs we need. Now, the cool part is, with DSC, is it doesn't care if it's the production or if it's the development or the trial version. Here's where things get interesting. Fire up the trial servers. Use DSC to define what your production configuration should look like. The boss signs off on it. Good. Now you can buy your production media. You buy your production servers. All you're doing, spinning up the brand new blank machines, reapply the configuration to the production servers. That's it. You're done. DSC absolutely rocks. I would say questions, but I'm not on audio here, and I think we're getting a bit close to time there, and the chat window can only do so much chatting. But if you're curious about DSC, I'll get you a hyperlink in a moment there. I'm going to give you my email address. There's my Cistel one, but you can reach me at an easier address, which is simply Sean, S-E-A-N, @powershell.ca. You can also ping me on Twitter 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the Energized Tech. I'm also hanging around Facebook, and if you ask your good friend Max nicely, he'll get this information for you if you didn't write it down, because I'm mostly harmless unless you give me RedBull and have me try to sing, in which case I'm very harmless, very harmful. So I promised you some resources. Because none of us wants to do lots of typing, up at the top here, you'll see one link, http://bit.ly/poshDSC. Now, if you know of some DSC resources I don't know of that aren't on this list, email me or email Max and have him get in touch with me, and I'll add it to this list. So this is going to be a list that's forever growing. I'm going to, whatever I get told that's a good DSC resource, I'm going to add it to this list. So this is going to be a nice little book stop. Now, the other one if you don't know it already, is the best site other than PowerShell.org, is scriptingguys.com. If you're not already going there, go there. And if you're already going there, well, it's a great place to go to. Your connection to the IM conversation has been lost. Lync will attempt to rejoin as soon as possible. Uh-oh. Did I just get lost? Oh, the clock ended. Are we still there? No, we're still here. No. Troubleshooting information. No, Lync, you suck. I think I lost connection. Can anybody hear me? Type if you can. Let's try something really dangerous. Okay. Your video is off. Press state to start video. Let's see if we can reach anybody. Unmute the audience. This will be dangerous. Can anybody hear me?
Hey, Sean?
Yep.
We can hear you.
Okay, good. I got a strange message from Lync indicating that no one could hear me, so sorry about that.
We can hear you. We can still see a slide deck. It's just your IM went down.
Okay, good. I feel less crazy. Or less confused. Anyways, as you already know, those are the best two spots to go to. That link you've got right there. Actually, if I can do the... No, I can't do the chat window. I will email Max the link. It's also on Bitly. It's actually Posh Hyper-V Lab. The P is capitalized, the H is capitalized, the L is capitalized. That goes straight to the TechNet script repository with that free PowerShell set of scripts, and also to the series of articles in Hey Scripting Guys and how we put it together. That's all I got for you tonight there. I would suspect PowerShell DSC is going to be your next best friend out there. Enjoy it. Take advantage of it. Use the free software. Get home earlier. Sit home at 5 o'clock and have a beer or your favorite drink of choice, rather than sitting all night trying to deal with servers, unless you really want to. Everyone, I'd like to thank you for your time. I'm Sean, the Energized Tech. I'm going to fly back up to Canada and tell my wife I'm actually having some fun tonight. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Sean. Does anybody have any questions for Sean?
I hear somebody waving their hands. Let's see, where's the little thing that says enable self-destruct? I'm not supposed to do that?
No. All right, Sean, nobody has any questions, and
they're afraid I might bite them is what it is. I'm sorry I bit the last guy. Oh, I see somebody I recognize. Hello, Jonathan Noble. All right, everyone, you guys enjoy your warm weather in Florida. I'm going to go back to my vicious, snowy, yucky weather up here in Canada. Have a safe one out there and keep using PowerShell.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you very much.
Oh, anytime at all. Been a pleasure.
Bye.
Ciao.